Hi, everyone, and welcome to the True Stories in Tech podcast, life-changing conversations in the areas of technology, business, and belonging. My name is Eddie Bader, managing partner of Aegis Innovators. We are a zero-trust cybersecurity firm. I'm here today with the usual suspects, Brian Enuma, president of Strategic Systems Group, Manish Bharti, president of Think AI Consulting, Eric Klaus, CEO of PartnerSource Solutions. Apologize. Let's just re-record that one.
Yeah. Also, bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to try and.
While you're scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was looking at this and go, wait a minute, this is not what it's supposed to look like.
Got Jason Price in there. All right, we'll take that. We'll just start one more time.
Good, and then now it's good. All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, 5-second pause, and we'll start again. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the True Stories of Tech podcast, life-changing conversations in the areas of technology, business, and belonging. My name is Eddie Bader. Our company is Aegis Innovators, and we are a zero-trust cybersecurity and work from anywhere Microsoft partner. Today, I'm here with my friends and usual suspects, Brian Enuma, president of Strategic Systems Group, Manish Bharti, president of Think AI Consulting, and Eric Klaus, CEO of PartnerSource Solutions. We're very excited to have a very special guest, a dear friend and colleague of mine, David Pryor, who's the director of corporate external legal affairs at Microsoft. David, welcome to the show. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Eddie. This is great. I really want to thank all of you for inviting me to the show today. This is a great honor, and I look forward to our chat.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun today. So corporate external legal affairs, it's a lot of people don't know that arm of Microsoft and what they do. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, what motivated you to be part of this group, and tell us what you enjoy about the work you're doing right now.
Well, that's a big question with a lot of questions packed inside. But let me start with, I guess we'll go chronologically and start with my upbringing. I was raised in Arkansas, and I was raised in a political family. It was really a great life experience for me. My father, frankly, the year I was born, decided to run for public office. He ran for the Arkansas Assembly, the state assembly, when I was born. And they used to carry me around in a laundry basket as they went to their barbecues and fish fries and handed out political buttons and bumper stickers and that kind of thing. So I've literally been involved in a political life my entire life since the day I was born. So it's been a fascinating journey, and it's really been, from my perspective, a great experience. Just to continue a bit, my father went on to become a member of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. from Arkansas. He was also governor, and he was also senator for 18 years. And then after that, my younger brother actually got elected to the U.S. Senate, and my younger brother was also the Attorney General. So a lot of my family did serve in public service. And getting back to your question, CELA and what we do in government affairs at Microsoft, that was really my entree to that world in the corporate world. Not actually my entree. I actually started at FedEx, where I was for about 9 years. But so for over 20 years, I've been in the government affairs world at Microsoft.
That's really good. So you're saying FedEx delivered you to Microsoft?
Yes, and it was an overnight delivery. Not really. FedEx is actually a great company. They are very, as you can figure out, very tech centric. Fred Smith, the CEO, who I worked with closely, was very focused on technology and using technology to, track packages and build that fleet of airplanes and create the incredible system that still is FedEx today. In fact, they've only gotten better. but I have great admiration for Fred Smith and, of course, Brad Smith. I guess I've worked for two Smiths in my career, and they're both just fantastic leaders because of their engagement. And I'll get into that later into the show.
Well, that's really cool, David. Hearing about your family and how you engaged, in this kind of political realm. When I think about you, one thing stands out to me is you're one of those people who tend to personify advocacy. And I know you're part of Voices for Innovation. And I was wondering, can you tell us how Voices for Innovation is kind of attached to CELA and what that means to you to advocate on behalf of those who need our help, and really describe what that help what form that help comes in, right? Because it's more than just donating money, it's more than just donating time, but it's actually, lobbying on behalf of those who might not have access. So would you expand on that?
Sure, Eddie. And you and I have worked together on a number of fun projects, and I hope we get into some of those a bit later. But the big distinction, CELA, as you mentioned, is corporate external legal affairs, and that differs from what I would call the partner group, which your audience and you are so familiar with. That's the partner ecosystem. But the CELA business is more focused on my role specifically is U.S. government affairs. And what that really means is I was Microsoft has a large office in Washington, D.C., and we have a very capable, very dedicated team that's committed to tech policy. And that's a broad term, and we can get into that. But the tech policy in our U.S. government affairs shop, I'm part of the external affairs team. Before my first 10 years at Microsoft, I've been around for about 13 years at Microsoft. My first 10 years I spent as the Senate Democratic lobbyist. And what that means is I would take Brad Smith to Capitol Hill and we would meet with senators when he came to town. And when he wasn't in town, I was meeting with senators and staff every day and going to the Hill and learning about various bills and initiatives and legislation that affect the technology industry. So this new role, Voices for Innovation, is really completely focused on empowering technology advocates, specifically Microsoft partners. So I work primarily with people like you, Eric, Brian, and others in the partner ecosystem. And I urge you, I train you, I hopefully inspire you to be advocates for the technology industry. And that's, I guess, a Reader's Digest version of what I do.
That's really awesome. Can you tell us like a couple of topics or issues that you're currently dealing with in that space?
Absolutely. I mean, Eddie, these topics and issues change. I would say the top 4, 5 right now, and pretty much always. Privacy has always been a number one issue for Microsoft. You know that. We've worked together on that before. Broadband is one that has come to the fore in the last couple of years. And the IMCP and many of the other the partner community has been so active in trying to get broadband access for those that don't have it. It's a very important issue. Another issue, cybersecurity. We work a lot of issues around ransomware and hacking, and frankly, hacking from nation states. We're talking about big hacking, not, your grandmother picking up the phone and thinking it's an AARP person and her bank account is all of a sudden drained. But I'm talking about foreign countries hacking into huge server systems or whatever, and really posing a grave threat to our nation's economic security and our national security, to be honest. So cybersecurity, broadband, privacy, those are just a few. One thing that I would love to just throw on the table is skilling initiatives, digital skilling. That's something that has become very prominent in my role, because it's very important to not only give people access to broadband, but to give them the skills that they can deliver and just participate in our very digital society.
Oh, that's a great synopsis of what you're doing. There's an added complexity to what you do as well, David, because I know that while a majority of these issues might be national, you do focus on individual states because they might be going through different things. Can you give us an example of where you might be really putting some effort in one or a few particular states that are going through some kind of issue that maybe not all the other states are going through?
Yeah, of course. And I'll focus on privacy for just a moment. We focused on 5 states recently in the last 6 months. I believe it was, Colorado, Virginia, Washington State, and a few others, where privacy laws were being drafted. And we saw an opportunity to work with various legislatures and governors to craft laws that had privacy guardrails. I won't get into all the privacy back and forth about Microsoft, but we are a strong believer that we need privacy guardrails in the ecosystem. And Microsoft does not want to be the police. We don't want to be the people that actually make the rules, but sometimes governments force us into a position where we have to react and kind of come up with rules. We would rather states create these policies and rules, and then, frankly, we'd love to see a national privacy policy. But to answer your question, Eddie, yes, we've been very active in a state like Colorado, where we'll get our small business partners in the Microsoft ecosystem we educate them on what is going on. Sometimes they know a lot more than we do. And then they send letters to their legislators, to their senators, to the governor. And Colorado is just a great success story. And we also were successful in Virginia as well with that strategy. So we didn't focus on a lot. It was not volume. It was quality of partners. Some folks had 5 or 10 employees, some had a couple of thousand, but this was a very local effort in a very few states, but it had tremendous impact.
That's really good. That explains it perfectly. Thank you, David. So before I let the guys start jumping in here, I do have another question. Well, I have a ton of questions, but one just before. Tell me about the 63 Ford Falcon Futura.
Wow, I wasn't ready for that one. Eddie, I'm not a car freak, but I do have just below me in my garage, I have this beautiful old vintage Falcon. It's a convertible. It is in very good shape. My wife is still angry that it gets to sit in the garage and not her car, but it is a car I picked up in college in 1979. I've had it ever since. So I've had this car a very long time. I'm so glad it can't talk because there's some great stories I'm sure it could tell. But the Falcon has been with me since 1979, and I'm sure that's older than most of your listeners today. But it is a great car, and I just actually had it out this Sunday. Took my son out for a spin, and we had a good time. It's just one of those loves and passions that sometimes it's a headache, but it's very nostalgic, and it brings a smile to my face to get out in it. And people really just want to say, "Wow, my dad had one of those," or that's how I learned to drive. So that's the story of my Falcon.
That's really cool. And I know people are going to ask color.
It's white. It's white on white with a blue interior, and it's in great shape.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, David.
Thank you. David, I'm involved locally at MCP and also other organizations. We talk sometime about VFI getting involved with government affairs. I want to understand like how people should keep a tab on and what people should know. And then second, so first is know and the action, what they should do, because we don't think our action matters that much, which you may know, you may have better perspective on it. So want you to talk a little bit about how to keep up with all the issues going on. And then second is how to get involved and help on the cause.
Well, Manish, first of all, thank you. That is a great question. I'm going to, of course, put on my VFI hat. And just for those in the audience that don't understand what VFI is, that stands for Voices for Innovation. Voices, or VFI, has been around, frankly. It was created after the DOJ basically tried to break Microsoft apart. And Steve Ballmer at the time, who was the CEO, he said, why don't we get our partners to speak on our behalf? And it's still there today. And I have the honor of managing our VFI ecosystem. It is a great, it's very simple. It's like a trade association. Frankly, it's a lot like the IAMCP. And it really allows those like-minded people and entrepreneurs and small business owners to channel their advocacy, their love of technology into issues that affect not only their clients, but frankly, the economy, and maybe it's even national security if it gets into the cybersecurity and ransomware and hacking and that kind of thing. So you can look at it in many different ways. But VFI has been around a long time. And what we do is very simple. We empower the Microsoft partner ecosystem. We train them to become advocates. We give them the tools. We hopefully inspire them to act, and we urge them to engage in technology policy. And that comes in many, many different forms. And Eddie and I will tell you, he can tell you that sometimes advocacy is being philanthropic and just being engaged in your community, in your school. It could be in just some little thing that is in your backyard that you're passionate about. But when you are passionate about something, you tend to engage. So I try to find people that are passionate and want to engage and love things that keep them interested and motivated. So I'm rambling a little bit, Manish, but I will say that VFI is a program for technology partners to get more engaged in things that are important to your families and frankly to your clients as well, and hopefully the nation. So these issues are very important to us, and it's just VFI is just one way to get involved.
Excellent. That sounds good. Little more perspective on the same government affairs. And I'm asking because I'm very distant from that. And so I'm asking more as a general question. In general, what people should do so they are more aware of the issues and get involved.
Yes, and Manish, I failed to answer that question. You did ask me that. One thing we do, and first of all, VFI is totally free to join. There are no fees, there are no obligations, there's no, try it for 30 days and then we'll bill you $39 a month. It is absolutely free. We want the power of the the tech ecosystem to weigh in and get engaged. So one way to stay informed, we send out a weekly, and you get this when you sign up. It's very easy to sign up. It's voicesforinnovation.org. It's free to sign up, and you can sign up for the executive briefing. And the executive briefing is simply a weekly news clips, and other content. We're starting to link to podcasts like this and other things so that our readers are informed about technology policy. So that's just a great way, just a little quick weekly read on policy and kind of trends and some of our top priorities at VFI.
I think that's pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna sign up and also encourage our members actually. And in fact, we can have you speak at MCP SoCal also, so that will be good.
Manish, I would love that. I before we started recording, we were talking about the wonderful program at the SoCal celebration. I believe it was the 10-year celebration, if I'm not mistaken. That was, of course, pre-COVID. Yeah. But that was a fantastic event. I actually used to live in Orange County for a few years. Wow. And that really, that was frankly the first time I had been back to Orange County since I left in 1986. I left in 1986, but I was in Orange County. I lived down around Costa Mesa, Newport area at Bristol and Baker, very close to where that conference was held. But I would love to speak to your group. You have a fantastic group. In fact, Laura Peters is very active in VFI, and she's one of my big advocates, and I'm just giving her a quick shout out because I think she's such a wonderful person. But yes, happy to speak to that, and I urge you to sign up anybody that wants to join VFI. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question I have is, so FedEx to Microsoft, what was the government affairs difference between them? I mean, you don't have to go too deep, but in general, I think each organization is different. What are the key differences you saw between them?
And well, listen, that's a great question. And I think I mentioned earlier that the Department of Justice had filed a suit against Microsoft.
Right.
In the 80s, I can't remember the exact year, but it really had an impact on Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And, Bill, of course, is a genius and very smart, but he did not know a lot about government affairs and how it worked. But when he found out that the government can literally knock on your door and say, okay, I think we're going to break you apart, all of a sudden you have to become very tuned in to what governments can do to your business, whether you're a small business or a big business. And, FedEx has had various issues, but they've never had the DOJ knock on their door and say, I think you're too big, we're going to break you apart. Now, of course, that's all happening again now with some of the bigger tech companies, Google and Amazon and others. But, I think the difference is, Manish, when you're given the threat of government intervention, you have to respond. And you hire people that know how to do this. You hire lawyers and experts and lobbyists and that kind of thing. And that's why our office has gotten so big in Washington, D.C. That's why Microsoft has a U.S. government affairs operation. So FedEx has a great office, but they're much smaller. But I would say Microsoft has a world-class, first-class government affairs operation. In fact, many emulate them on many levels. But it is I'll be honest, Brad Smith is one of the greatest lobbyists the tech industry has ever known and perhaps will know. I don't know if you know Brad very well, but he's very engaged. He's very smart. And there's a reason he's been at Microsoft for a very long time.
Excellent. Thank you.
David, all of this is fascinating, and to be honest, a little bit foreign to me because I haven't been involved in politics much at all for much of my career. So thank you. This has been
Brian. We're going to change that.
No, that's what I was.
We're going to sign you up for VFI, and you're going to be one of my super advocates very soon.
That's what I was afraid of. To go back a little bit of your education, I spotted something of about George Washington University. Is that where you spent much of your education?
Yes, I actually started in Arkansas and then took a break from college. I was not a stellar academic achiever, but I did take some time off, and that's when I went to California. I got involved in the real estate syndication business back in the 80s, and it was just fascinating because it was a business world I was not familiar with. But I got a couple of licenses, and actually, it really tweaked my interest to go back to school and learn more. So I actually started a night program at Pepperdine University. They had a great program. I'm sure you know where that is. But then I had something happen in my family where I had to move back to Washington, and I wanted to finish my degree. So I did graduate from George Washington, and I attended at night. I actually came back to DC and worked for Hill and Knowlton Public Relations for about 5 years or so while I got my degree, and learned a different side of the business, which is public relations and public affairs. Totally different from government relations, but gave me a good grounding for some of the things that I'm doing now.
Good. One of the other things that I saw in your LinkedIn profile, it looks like it relates to something called St. Colette.
Yes, St. Colette of Greater Washington. I think that I have a son, a special needs son. He's 26 years old, and he goes to an adult program. In fact, he's been in the St. Colette program since he was 6 years old. My son is in a wheelchair. He is unable to participate in regular schooling, and so it's all special needs programming. He's currently in the adult program, but St. Colette is a fantastic program for school students and adults alike, and it's based in Washington, D.C. I have served on the board of St. Colette, oh my gosh, I think for the past maybe 15 years. I forget sometimes, but it is certainly my number one cause. Of course, you know, we're always connected to causes that impact our families. So I'm engaged in St. Coletta's of Greater Washington because it's just, you know, it's a family connection. So I hope that answers your question, but it's a great learning facility for folks, children and adults with special needs.
That's cool. Very good. There is something that I saw about the U.S. Department of State.
Yes, Brian, that was a very interesting and educational chapter of my life. I had the honor of serving as the Deputy Chief of Protocol at the State Department. Now, what does that mean? Under President Bill Clinton, I was selected to serve in this role. And what the Protocol Office does is we welcome foreign heads of state and kings and whatnot to the United States when the president is meeting with them. We also travel with the president of the United States to a foreign country. And it's not where the butter knife goes. It's more the formalities involved in diplomacy. And it's a very structured, very exacting process. And it's a very important process in diplomacy. You have to get everything right. There is no room for error. And when there is an error, you know, sometimes things can go awry in diplomatic relations. But as a sworn protocol officer, I never reveal things that go wrong. We only talk about the things that go right. But it was a fantastic opportunity. I got to travel to, I don't know, 18 or 20 countries in a span of 3 years. You travel on a black passport, which is a diplomatic passport. And oftentimes you're traveling with the president of the United States. So there's an added feature of of just awe and amazement, but you have to be on your toes. You always have to be on your game, but it was one of the most challenging yet rewarding experiences of my life. Not saying I would wish I could do it again, but I really enjoyed doing it when I did.
Cool. One more thing that I saw that was interesting was something called Proud Pig Productions.
Yes, I can't believe I haven't expunged that from my biography, but actually that was probably the most fun thing I ever did. Believe it or not, I used to be a rock and roll event producer, but it was all related to politics. I mentioned Bill Clinton. I had joined his campaign. I mentioned I was from Arkansas. Bill Clinton, of course, is from Arkansas. When he decided to run, I actually left my job at Hill and Knowlton Public Affairs in Washington and joined Bill Clinton's campaign. And I know a lot of people thought it was not the greatest idea, but politics, like horse racing, he ended up winning. And that is what led me to the Office of Protocol. But in between the campaign years and the protocol years, I actually had my own business called Proud Pig Productions. And we did events to engage young Democrats. And we would get them engaged through music, through low dollar events, through happy hours, through different ways. Instead of the normal, hey, it's $1,000 to attend, we would create events that were $50 to attend. And our goal was to get more young people engaged in politics. I happen to be a Democrat, so we targeted Democrats, but we wanted more people to be engaged in politics at the younger level without having a huge pocketbook. And sometimes the barrier to entry, as you know, in politics is money. And we were trying to open that up to younger people or folks that didn't have money to get more people engaged in the process. So that's kind of the story of Proud Pig Productions. You know, from Arkansas, the Razorback is our football mascot. And the logo for Proud Pig is a Razorback in a tuxedo because he was attending all these great events, and that's what we did.
That is so much fun. I think about how things are today, and the impact that the young people have on the country. One story that I tell, I have a subscription to the WeWork location in Long Beach. I'm positive I am the oldest one there. They're typically late 20s, early 30s. And yet I feel like there's an energy there that is special. So your story about the young Democrats sort of rings true with me when I'm there. There is something that I have observed, and this is my last question. I'll pass it off. There was a young woman who I came to meet at a Microsoft store in Cerritos. Her name is Lena Gonzalez. So I don't know if you're familiar with Lena, but when I first met her, it was for Microsoft Community Connections program. So we were doing seminars and things and presentations and so forth in the Microsoft stores. I haven't followed that closely for her career, but as I recall at the time, I think she was also involved in city assembly, I think. And then not that long ago, I see a post from Lena, and apparently she is now a state assembly person. So that I just marvel at that sort of progression. Have you followed her at all?
I do not know her, but I love those stories, Brian, because that speaks to what I was mentioning earlier, and that's about engagement. And that passion is that spark that gets you to, maybe you work at the Microsoft store in Cerritos, but you say, you know what? I could really change my school board, or I can make a difference in my community at the local level. You can still work at the Microsoft store and serve on the General Assembly. I mean, you can do both, but those are the type of people that, they're rare, Brian, and we have to find them and cultivate them and inspire them to do what they do, because maybe you or I may not run for office, but we need these young, bright, inspired people to say, you know what? I want to make a difference. I want to do something. I want to take the skills that I think I have and turn that into something that serves a public good or a public service. So I love that story, Brian. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, David.
So, David, I'll chime in here. I know a few years ago, I think it was 3 years ago last month, actually, as I'm thinking about it, courtesy of Voices for Innovation, I had the opportunity to extend my trip to Washington, D.C., and spend a day out on Capitol Hill meeting with some of our U.S. representatives and senators. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this. One of the things that I remember in kind of my training, my lead up to that, was, and it's a statistic that I've leveraged since then because it blew me away, and that is that the politics doesn't matter here. The interesting thing that I took away was, and when I say politics, political party, I guess is what I mean by that, is whatever you're passionate about, as you were talking about before, there's a place for that in government. One of the challenges that we have in this country is that on any particular issue that might be going to whether they're a U.S. representative, a senator, they overwhelmingly are not hearing from people like us, right? I think I remember the statistic was something like they hear from less than 2% of their constituents on any given bill or issue that they might be listening in on or voting on. What is the, so I guess it's twofold, right? How do we change that, which I think is part of where VFI comes in, and what is the impact of that? If they're not listening to me and they're not listening to Manish or Brian, there's somebody that they're listening to. Who is that somebody?
That's a good question. Now, I think the knee-jerk answer would be, well, they're listening to the paid lobbyists in Washington, D.C. in the Beltway. And of course, that is somewhat true, of course, because the lobbyists in DC, they're trained professionals. They know how to access Capitol Hill. They know how to get into these offices and actually speak the jargon and speak the government talk that these staffers and members are so used to. But the first part of your question, I really think that I am so thrilled that you actually participated in the process. And that, I'm telling you, that is what VFI is all about. It is about giving you and Brian and Manish and Eddie the tools to raise your voice, to say, hey, I care about this, whether it's ransomware or privacy or broadband, whatever it is. You have the ability to contact your public servant, and don't forget the word public servant is that person is actually, he's on your, or he or she is on your payroll. And that's so important for you to be able to understand that distinction, that you have the right to go out and talk to these folks. And that's what VFI wants to do. We want to give you the tools and the confidence to go talk to your elected representatives. And so that's what we're trying to do. I think, to be fair, politics has gotten very partisan. VFI is nonpartisan. We do not take sides. It's very much like Microsoft. We have to walk both sides of the fence, and we're very careful on how we do that. I am a Democrat. I am paid to be partisan sometimes in my role doing other things at Microsoft, but when I have my VFI hat on, I have to be nonpartisan. And I'm proud to do that because, frankly, at the end of the day, everybody has a right to express their views, their voice, and their opinions. And if they don't do that, then that's too bad, because that's how democracy works. That's how we want it to work. So we want to be able to give those tools to whoever is listening on this podcast to just voice their voice, Republican or Democrat or Libertarian, whoever it is. You have a choice, you have a voice, and hopefully you'll take your feet and go to Capitol Hill and do that. So thank you for participating, Eric. We appreciate that.
Well, no, thank you, David. It was an amazing experience, and I certainly encourage all of the partners who are out there who might be listening to our podcast to first off, as David said earlier, sign up for VFI, but get engaged in the process, regardless of where you sit from a political spectrum standpoint. I think we're all better off when our voices are being heard. And as a small Microsoft partner, which I think the majority of partners are, we're small business owners, and it's that voice that I think is important in government as well, because you're not just there to talk about the technology, but also about your role in your community as a small business owner, and the impact of government decisions on small businesses. And that was what I was doing in 2018. I was, very concerned with a number of different topics, and the impact of government decisions at that point in time on me as a small business owner. Certainly I also look at the larger, the tech ecosystem, because obviously we play in that space. But there are a lot of decisions that as a small business owner come from government, and you have a voice in those areas as well.
And Eric, if I could pick up on a thread, you mentioned the voice of a small business owner, and then I mentioned the voice of a lobbyist. And I will tell you this, if you're an elected official, you're going to give the voice of that person that actually votes for you a much stronger, you're gonna weigh that as more important than a lobbyist coming into the office, because the elected member knows that lobbyist is paid to do this. But when Eric comes in as a small business owner and talks to his representative, that voice is going to be heard much louder than the lobbyist. Now, the lobbyist may have all the tools and the access and the smarts and the wherewithal and know how to kind of game the system a bit. But at the end of the day, Eric, your voice is more powerful. And I hope you will always remember that.
No,
and take advantage of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So you talked about earlier a couple of topics, and I think they're interrelated. I'd love to get your perspective on this, but you talked about broadband, but you also talked about social justice, economic, and what is the intersection of those areas? Because I have to believe that when we look at broadband access in today's world, just how do you even engage, from a business standpoint, to be able to, we work from home, right, for the last year and some in the COVID world. If you don't have broadband, you can't even participate in that part of the economy. And we know that a lot of people have benefited from that where they have broadband access today, but I also know that there are still large swaths of this country that don't have that, including, as we sit here, all of us in Southern California. A couple of years ago, I was dating a lovely woman who lived in a more remote area of Central California. And it never occurred to me that where she lived, they would not have broadband. You think of California and you think the tech hub of, or at least one of the tech hubs, certainly the Silicon Valley area is the tech hub of the world. And you just kind of assume that everybody in California has access to broadband. And at one point, she and I were talking early on when we had just first started dating, and she did not have internet access at her home. And the cost to get broadband where she lived at the time was cost prohibitive. And that was a real eye opener for me into that whole experience, and then extrapolating from there when you go into more rural parts of this country. But to even just realize that exists in California blew me away.
Well, listen, and if I could just connect a couple of the dots that you just put out there, Eric, you mentioned small business access and the economy. And you said, well, what about philanthropy, and why do all these other things matter? Let me build a bridge to the next step. What about kids that don't have access to the internet during COVID? How do kids get online to do those classes? How do college students graduate? I mean, it is so much more beyond just the economy. It is the fabric of our nation to be able to participate if you choose. Sometimes others have more resources to participate. You had better access than your lady friend, let's say. That was not her fault. That was just a condition of where she lived. Think about others that perhaps don't have the income, or frankly live in a spot that just doesn't have broadband access. They're already on a lower peg in our system, and they are handicapped. So I mentioned broadband, why it's important. It's not just the economy, it's for everyone to be able to have government services and education and other things that we as Americans, I hate to say this, take for granted. If you read the newspaper and look around what's happening in the world, we are very fortunate in so many ways. However, if we fail to engage, if we fail to appreciate those little things, then you know what? They may erode away. They may not be as easy to get on this next time around. The kids that are not getting the education, they're already a year and a half behind. We know that. What happens next? This Delta variant is not going away anytime soon. So I don't want to get on my little soapbox, but there are a lot of connections that frankly, engagement. That's why it's so important to engage and to be passionate about what you're doing.
It sounds like there are, and I think that's what we've just discussed, inequalities, that get created yes. by lack of internet access, which, as a child, I was born in 1965, so I'm of an age where I did not grow up with the internet. It came much later. I was passionate about it though when it came and embraced it. But you look at the world today, and how do you exist? My mother, is 84 years old. When we were dealing with COVID, and she was trying to get a vaccine earlier this year.
Exactly.
All of that was being driven online.
Yes.
And my mother, God bless her, 84 years old, not exactly the most technical person on the face of the earth. So I was basically doing it all for her because everything was online, register for an appointment. And how do I do that, right? If you're 84 years old and she has a cell phone, but not not a smartphone. And my mother, again, God bless her, but she's one of those people who she keeps her phone only for emergencies. Her cell phone only gets turned on when she leaves the house. That type of mentality that we have in our seniors. So it doesn't just impact, I think it impacts people across a wide spectrum of our population. Our seniors, like my mother, struggle with the internet for one reason, because they're unfamiliar with it, but they're being driven there. Obviously, I'm sure Manisha's kids have probably been online since birth, or probably shortly thereafter.
Yep.
And so they're very used to it. But if you don't have that access, then going back to the woman that I was dealing, she was raising a young daughter at the time. And, you know, I can't even imagine, you know, schooling today without internet access and what that must be like. So this is a topic that, you know, for Microsoft is important. I think for everyone is important. How should partners be engaged around this as it impacts the business world today?
You know, that's a great question, and I think there's a lot of ways to answer that, Eric. But I would say that when you are passionate about, let's say, your business, and you want your clients and customers to, of course, remain with you, you have to be not only savvy and just a little bit more informed than, you know, the competitor down the street. You have to be engaged enough to pick up the extra intelligence to be the better partner, to be the better, you know, provider of services, if you will. And, you know, there's a lot of ways to do that. It's not always about sales. It's not always about selling more stuff or selling more products and services to your people. Of course, you know, the income is better, but sometimes people actually feel better and work better when they're helping others and informing others on various things that are important to them. And those customers and clients then look toward that. I won't call them experts. You don't have to be an expert, but look toward that advocate, that informed advocate, to be a resource. And sometimes these informed advocates can make such a difference in the lives of people that do not have income equality. Or even your lady friend, she may have had a great job, she may have had a great computer, but if her home doesn't have access, and you mentioned a child, I believe, if that child doesn't get the education, I mean, that's an inequality that needs to be addressed. And you know, that's just one way I think Microsoft partners and people that listen to this podcast can get engaged and try to make a difference, because you are sitting at top of the food chain. Okay. We have things that others don't have. Let's not be selfish. Let's try to engage for others. Eddie and I have had many conversations around this topic, even whether it's donating devices to folks or helping folks like your mother. That's an age inequality. And it's not her fault that she doesn't have a smartphone or, frankly, knows how to use it. That goes back to the digital skilling thing I mentioned earlier. But it is very important to try to pass on what we know as technologists to others that may not have those benefits, that access, or that equality standard. I hope that's a kind of a rambling answer to your question, but I hope that helps answer that.
Well, that's okay, because I think I had a rambling question, David. So thank you. So, you know, you mentioned being out for the 10th anniversary celebration for IMCP SoCal a couple of years ago. You may or may not know that I was the first philanthropy chairperson for IMCP SoCal.
I love it.
And so philanthropy is something that is near and dear to my heart. And maybe sometime I'll tell you a story. We can someday in the future, maybe we'll get a chance to sit down and have a beer together or something, and I can tell you how I came to be the SoCal philanthropy chair. But what is the intersection for you of philanthropy, VFI, and IMCP for that matter? Where does all of this come together?
That is the simplest question, and I'm going to give you a one-word answer: engagement. First of all, let's face it, anybody that joins IAMCP is already focused on getting to that next level. They want to network, they want to improve their skills, they want to improve their sales. They want to just be a little bit smarter than the next guy. But when it comes to philanthropy, that's about engagement. And That's exactly what advocacy is. Advocacy equals engagement. Philanthropy equals engagement. It's about passion for something you believe in. And it's so easy when you care about something. It's like St. Colette of Greater Washington for me. My son goes there. By God, I'm going to help that school raise money. I'm going to help that school get devices, whatever it takes, because I'm passionate about it. Like, I don't even know your story about philanthropy in Southern California, but Eric, you are already an engaged and informed advocate. You've already told me you've been to Capitol Hill. You have the skills and the passion to engage. And that's what we want to recruit, not just at VFI, but IAMCP. I mean, we need more folks like that to join that fold and just get a little bit more engaged and try to help others a little bit. I know that sounds kind of, saving the world and all that kind of stuff, but it is very important. Your mother's a great example. I know you think it's a pain to help her sometimes and get online, but how important is it for her to have that vaccine? Otherwise, Eric, she wouldn't have it if it weren't for your engagement. So thank you for being an engaged advocate. And listen, I could talk about this all day long, so I'm just going to shut up right now.
No, David, thank you so much. Digital skilling, maybe let's talk a little bit about that and the importance of digital skilling, and then, where VFI is engaging. And Eddie, maybe you want to chime in here and talk about where VFI is engaging with IAMCP and how all of these things sort of converge.
Sure. And listen, digital skilling is, let me give you a great example, and I'm going to name drop a person that Eddie and I work with very closely. Her name is Chaitra. Chaitra was one of the co-founders of Women in Cloud, and I'm sure you're aware of the organization. You probably know Chaitra. She's certainly a force of nature and just an incredible advocate. But she has 600 female advocates that she has trained, inspired, and motivated to get engaged. And they'll go to state capitals, mostly in Washington State. But the one thing we were talking a few months back, and a colleague of mine called me and said, "Hey, I have some scholarships to give away for cloud training, for Azure cloud skilling." And they're, it's hard. It's like it's a 3-week or a 6 weeks course, and it's not for everybody. So I said to my internal colleague, I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" She says, "I have 600 certificates or courses that I can give away, and I really need to scale this thing." And I said, "Well, have you talked to Women in Cloud? This person is just suited to not only set it up, but to actually manage it and organize it." Lo and behold, just a month or two later, this woman, Chaitra, has already given out all of the scholarships. And when you think about it, these scholarships will give women, these are all women, by the way, all women will do these scholarships. They will learn absolutely free. They don't care where they come from, what their income level is, how old they are, if they have a telephone or a computer. If they can get online and do this coursework, they will get a scholarship from Microsoft in Azure Skills. I don't know the exact name, but I'm telling you, this person who graduates with this degree or this certificate, it is not a school program, this certificate will automatically be heads up over and above most, tech trained people that you and I kind of know. A lot of us, we learn how to wire stuff up or code, or we started, in basements and garages and whatnot, maybe like Bill Gates, not exactly like Bill Gates, or we wouldn't be sitting here. But these women have been given an opportunity through the philanthropy of Microsoft because they want to train women and people of color and people that don't have access to these services and schooling and programs. And, Chaitra, I wish maybe you ought to interview her for a podcast, but these are the kind of programs that just make me so proud to work for Microsoft, because now we can say, and Eddie helped me with this, Eddie and I can turn around and say, hey, great work on the women in cloud thing, because now all of a sudden 600 women have a unique opportunity to just have a different step in life. And so that's the kind of stuff that Eddie and I like to work on together. And I'll close it out there.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think, one of the things, and we do have Chaitra on our list to bring over because she'd be, a great guest. But I think one of the other things we're looking at from an IMCP perspective is once we get these folks trained and skilled up, they need to be connected to the community, right? And so we're working with Women in Cloud, the WIT Network, and BCPA to make sure that we don't leave anybody out of the conversation. And so we do that by sponsoring memberships so that they can not only learn something, but start connecting and networking with potential clients, or not potential clients, but potential employers. And maybe for those, select few, maybe they're going to get inspired to be their own boss one day, right? And start their own company. And so I also wanted to kind of bring this back a little bit because what we just talked about, if we don't pay attention to the details here, we'll miss something that's been a common thread. So we talked about how we had 600, scholarships go out, and it's awesome. But there was a qualifier there that you miss if you're not paying attention, and it's if you have internet access. And we talked about that, right?
Yes.
So how many women would have been interested in getting involved in this but didn't have access, so self-selected themselves out? So we have to take it to the next level and understand who are we excluding, not on purpose, but who are we leaving behind, and how do we get to them as well, right? So some of this conversation has been awesome because it talks about advocacy in many forms. It talks about engagement in many forms, and I just want to stress we've talked about politics, but you don't have to be politically engaged or politically involved to make a difference. You don't have to be political to be an advocate. You just have to care and care about something, right? To David's point, I think his message has been really clear, is that as long as you care about something, you can be an incredible advocate. And I think that it's not about, there are many topics. You can go white space, you could go, digital skilling, but it's really finding something that motivates you, that drives you, that you would like to participate in and make a difference, because nobody will have to ask you to do anything. You'll just get up and want to make a difference in that space. So I just want to make sure that when we talk about advocacy in all of its forms, it might not even be technology, but there's an opportunity for you to go out there and make a difference. And I think for those who have, it's important to advocate on behalf of those who don't, right? And does that make sense?
Yeah, Eddie, I'm so glad you brought that up. And you just mentioned a couple of acronyms. In DC, we're in the Beltway, we speak in acronyms, and for the listening audience, I do want to clarify a couple of those acronyms because they are so important to the equation for success in what all of us are doing on this podcast. You mentioned a few groups. One was BCPA. That is the Black Channel Partner Alliance. That was literally formed less than a year ago. And thanks to Eddie and a lot of other folks that really dug in, that is going to provide, hopefully, access and resources to a community of Black partners that are hardly even recognized. We can't even find out, how many we have because the records are so poor on finding these Black partners. And you mentioned Women in Cloud, WIC. This is another community that needs to be they just need more access and empowerment to get to where they're going. And I'd love to just, if I could, since I have the microphone, Eddie, you and I have talked about this, and that is what I would call wholesale advocacy. And that's when we harness the power of Women in Cloud, the Black Channel Partner Alliance, the Women in Tech. When we focus these groups and channel our advocacy in one or two or three directions, it just becomes more powerful and more magnified. And that's when we start to make a difference. That's when we start to see scale. But I do want to make that point. You and I have had this conversation many times about linking our communities in the tech industry so that we are helping others that maybe don't have access. Maybe it's women, maybe it's people of color, maybe it's folks like Eric's mom that are just older and don't have the wherewithal to get onto a computer or even have a smartphone. So the power of collective advocacy is strong, and I think that's an important point. I hope the audience would take away from this conversation.
Yeah, and earlier we talked about different places of intersectionality, and I know that we have a DEI chair, Christopher Cost, who talks about that as well. So think of yourself as a combination of things, right? So you're Black. Well, you might not have access to certain things, or we know at least in this ecosystem you're underrepresented, right? But now if you're a Black woman, that's adding a level of, as a woman, you're also equally in the minority in this group. And so when we start layering all of these things, you have to understand the hurdles and the walls sometimes get exponential in front of you. And so we have to be mindful of that, right? We have to understand that, one person doesn't speak for a whole group, and one person's experience doesn't represent everyone's experience that you may think is in that group. So it's really important for us to be mindful in layers, So if you're Hispanic and you're part of the LGBT community, that is another intersection that we may have to address in a different way and be mindful of. And I think, like I said, it's just really important. And I just want to correct something, David. I think you give me like far too much credit for BCPA. I was like involved, but there's a lot of other fine folks like Frank and Nyasha and all those, Danny Brown and Lauren, and they're the ones that did all the heavy lifting. I was just, in the conversation at times. But yeah, the work that we can do together is much greater than the work that we can do separately. And identifying each of these communities' strengths and leveraging those. So we don't have to be, IAMCP doesn't have to be the leader for everything. They can be the support for the Women in Cloud initiatives, and then Women in Cloud can be the support for the Black Channel Partner Alliance initiatives. And I think we are so much more dynamic when we look at our problems and solve them in that way. So I'm really excited about that. And one thing I wanted to talk about too is, we look in terms of who we need to include, but whenever we do something new, whenever we roll out a policy, or we roll out an initiative or a program, we also have to filter it through the lens of who are we excluding, right? And when we talk about having a seat at the table because we're in a place of abundance, and making sure that we invite somebody who hasn't been there or who doesn't have access to give them access, there's almost a sense that somebody has to give up their spot so that somebody else can sit at the table. And that is not the truth. And I'm going to make this analogy as silly as it is, but there's not limited space at the table. We just open the table, put a new leaf in, and add some chairs and bring more people to it. We're not replacing anybody. We're just inviting more people, right? And we're expanding the table. And I really want to make sure everybody gets that message, because that's the goal of this, is not to put somebody else in the minority seat. It's to bring us all together so we can all have the same opportunities and the same advantages and places to grow. If you want to change, you should be able to change, and it shouldn't be hindered by where you were born or wherever whatever you look like, however you feel, whatever your social position is. Access should be for everybody, right? And so again, find your place, find what you're passionate about, and do something. Even in one small act does not go unnoticed, and I guarantee you that somebody will benefit from your engagement.
Eddie, I agree. And of course, you're being humble, of course, but you are at the head of the table for IMCP. And I've watched you direct resources where they need to be directed. And you've helped people that otherwise might perhaps been left behind or considered at another time or whatever. But I've watched you do this. Here's the good news, and you don't know all of this yet, but Chaitra and I have been talking that we are going to, you, Chaitra, myself, Christine from the Women in Tech Network, and BCPA, we're going to band together and we're going to form kind of an advocacy council, if you will. That's not the name, that's not the title, but we're going to channel our resources and provide some training modules for basic advocacy, just 101 advocacy. What is Capitol Hill and why is it important? How do I make an appointment with my elected member back home? We're going to create some modules so that everybody can participate and learn more. But more to that on come. I won't spoil it on this show with those details. You and I have some talking to do on our programming together. And I look forward to working toward that goal, however.
That's awesome news, David. I'm excited. I love working with all those people and all those communities. So, as we wrap up here, we typically ask our guest, what does an ideal partnership look like to you? So when you're thinking about it and you're reaching listeners, you're reaching partners, what does that look like? It might be a non-traditional partnership in the way we've talked before, but what do you look for in meeting new people and connecting with partners?
That's a great question. And remember, VFI or me, David Pryor, will never ask a VFI participant to sell more product. That's not what I do. I don't care how much product you sell. That's up to you. The point is, if you've come to the VFI table, you are engaged, you're informed, or you want to be more informed, and you want to do something. So I look for partners. I don't care if they're 2 people or 2,000. I just don't care how many employees. I don't care if you have a footprint in Chicago or Honolulu or wherever. I want someone that is willing to engage, pick up the phone, call a member of Congress or your elected official, your elected representative, and say, you know what? I care about this, and I want you to do something about it. That is the ideal partnership for me. That I would rather have the one-man shop than a 10,000 person organization that can act with speed and passion. So I guess that would be the answer to your question, Eddie.
That's awesome. And I know we've talked about it already, but I want to give you an opportunity to plug that again. If listeners are interested in learning more about advocacy, Voices for Innovation, or wanting to connect with you, how do they do that?
Sure, Eddie, it's voicesforinnovation.org. We are nonprofit. We do not charge fees. There's no obligation. We are wholly owned by Microsoft. We don't hide behind anything. We, carry out Microsoft's top legislative priorities, but we will train you to be a better advocate, a better informed partner, and I believe you'll provide better customer service and frankly may just add to your community or your family or other things that are important to you. So get engaged, sign up, and we'll do the rest. Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, David, thank you very much for your time today, for sharing both personally and professionally. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I know we're going to have you back because there's so much more. We're just scratching the surface on advocacy and engagement, and this is just very enlightening. So I want you to earmark some time for us a little bit in the future. We'll bring you back and have a follow up. So. Thanks again. Folks, that will do it for this episode of True Stories in Tech. I'm Eddie Bader with Aegis Innovators, along with my friends Manish Bardia, President of Think AI Consulting, Brian Nanuma, President of Strategic Systems Group, and Eric Klaus, CEO of Partner Source Solutions. Thanks for listening, and please join us next week for more True Stories in Tech. And we're out.
And that's a wrap.
That is a wrap.
All right. Well, listen, thank you, gentlemen, for this. This has been fun. These are just exciting to do. And I, of course, learned something about each one of you. And I frankly look forward to working with all of you. Again, I'm working with Eddie. We have lots of work to do together.
Yes,
Eric,
we do.
I want to get you back to DC. And, we're going to turn Brian into a top-notch advocate. He's not even going to realize.
Hey,
Yeah.
we got to get Brian to DC sometime too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I want to go for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to, I'd love to gather in person, of course. I don't know when I'll be getting back out to SoCal, but it's a special place for me. And I really thank you guys for thinking of me today and having me on the show.
Yeah,
It's been a treat. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
David.
it has been. And I just want to ask you, how cool did that Falcon Futura look riding down PCH? I just want to know. Like,
you know what? I never had it in California.
Oh,
I
no.
parked it at a friend's house in Arkansas for about I think it was about 5 or 6 years. He kept it literally, in his front yard. In Arkansas, a lot of people just have their washer, dryer, and cars and stuff out on the front porch or in their front yard. But that Falcon is a special thing for me. But I promise you, it's in great shape. And when I'm rolling around DC, people are like, "Yes, I love it." So it is low tech. It is very low tech.
That's great.
But it brings smiles to people's faces. That's all that matters.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll let you go make dinner
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yes.
so much, David.
A pleasure.
Really
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much.
I'll connect
Thank
with
you,
you
everyone.
on follow up to your email too.
Yeah, Eddie, we'll talk next week.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.